Imagine a game designer. He's thought of a great idea for a brand new game. He writes out some quick rules, grabs some dice, and starts playing. But through those first couple tests, the favorite keeps losing. The underdog keeps hanging around. And his big moments, they're not feeling earned. So what does the designer do? His first instinct says it's the dice. They're too random. They're too swingy. They're too unpredictable. So he starts making some fixes. He adds some modifiers to some of the rolls. He adjusts his charts a little bit. He's making sure that the stronger teams get a little bit more bonuses. After a few more tests, game still feels off. Now the favorite's winning too much. The drama, though, is gone. And that's when the real lesson hits. The dice weren't the problem. At designer, he had never really defined what the game was supposed to produce. So the issue wasn't randomness. The issue was process. And what this designer needs is broader perspective, more diverse opinions. This is the Tabletop SportCast. Welcome to the Tabletop SportCast, where the best stories aren't just told, they're played. We bring you the hobby of tabletop sports gaming through interviews, game reports, and other topics, especially around projects. This is episode 252, and today we're going to talk about playtesting and the role playtesting plays through the game design process. And it has a shifting responsibility depending on where you are in that process. So as part of this discussion, we're also going to talk about what's called the DMAIC process. I'll give a little bit of a description of what that is as we get into today's main topic. But playtesting really is one of those key roles that we have as gamers at times. And if you've ever been asked to do some playtesting for a designer, you've probably been in this position of wondering, what is it exactly that they're looking for? Well, I'm not going to speak for everyone in every situation, but I think that this will give kind of a general idea about the role that playtesting plays in different spots as we go through the design process. Last week was episode 251, and we got a chance to talk about the Universal Baseball Association. Gave a little review of that book. And, I've gotten some feedback on it, and I will say, overall, I left a little bit wanting with the end of the book. I didn't really give, a review necessarily of the book from did I like it, did I not like it? But it was one of those that kind of stayed with me, and I kept thinking about it after listening to it on my ride out to IndyCon and having some downtime. I kept thinking about the book, and that's really where the episode kind of got framed up, was to say, there was something here. There was something in this book that really did kind of stick with me, and that's really what I attempted to do with last week's episode, was give you a little bit more of a different perspective of what I was picking up from that book. So yeah, I've heard from people who thought it was a great book. I've heard from people who didn't enjoy the book at all, and I think it will hit a lot of different spectrums because it's an odd story, for sure, but one that is probably relatable for those of us who are in the hobby. In terms of what I've been playing the past week or so, again, it's just kind of getting into a rhythm again, trying to build up some things. And, you can check out my Facebook page and we'll cover where that is at the end of the episode. But yeah, I've had a couple of games. I think the key one has been working on a few different projects. And last night got a chance to run the next race in my 1992 NASCAR series using red, white, and blue racing. And it was Ricky Rudd. Ricky Rudd has been really competitive pretty much in every race so far this year. Was able to go and take the checkered flag at the Motorcraft Quality Parts 500. This was a race in Atlanta. And he took the lead late. He got the lead late, although he had also led the most turns throughout the race. So he had the lead a few different times throughout the race and was always right there among the top drivers in the pack. He never really had that moment where he kind of fell back in the pack. He pretty much hung around that top group most of the race. So he was very competitive and ends up taking it in the end, gets that checkered flag. So that was the highlight for this week. But yeah, I've been able to get some stuff going with face to the mat, payoff pitch, grid zone, even decathlon. And you saw a few of those get reported on my Facebook page during the course of the week. So if you missed any of those, go and check those out. All right. Let's see. I think we'll shift now into today's main topic. Didn't have a lot to cover in terms of what's new around the game community, like from designers. So we'll take this spin instead and talk a little bit about the role that playtesting has in game design. So first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about what the DMAIC process is. So when you hear me talking about DMAIC, this is a process design framework. And here's what you do with DMAIC is you start with, and this is the acronym, D is for design. So the first thing you do with a process or a product is you're going to design it. And really, most of our games are both those things, right? There is a product that you're putting together, but I also think that a lot of what we're getting feedback on, in addition to the product, is also the process that makes the game what it is. So first, you need to design it. The second is M, which stands for measure. You've got to figure out a way to measure, what are the measurements I'm going to use to figure out if this game is working successfully. And maybe that is measuring, if it is a historical replay type game or a simulation, it might be measuring against established statistics. The third letter A stands for analyze. And this is obviously where we will, after measuring, we will look at those results and start to create some analysis to understand, is this thing doing what it's supposed to do? And we might also look at depending on what we have to do, there's a little bit of risk analysis that would come in here too. Then we get to the last two phases. I stands for improve. So after you have measured everything and analyzed it, now you have started to figure out what are the things that I need to do to improve this process. And then the last one is a control. And that's where we just make sure that the process is continuing to deliver as expected. In between those last two phases of improve and control is usually when you go live with something. So the control phase is post launch, right? You want to make sure that after launching something, you probably are watching it for those next, depending on your time frame. I would say, next 3 months probably is a good time frame to think about to look and see how things are going. The lead up to that launch is where you're doing a lot of the improvement phase. Now, all throughout this, there's an opportunity for game designers, and we're going to frame the rest of this process, this framework of DMAIC, in terms of doing it specifically for game design. And I think one of the key things that game designers need to do is make sure that they are receiving feedback throughout. And some of that feedback comes from them directly, right? They're probably their first playtester is the designer themselves. But they are also going to look for feedback from others. And they're going to incorporate people throughout that process. And usually that starts with a simple question like, hey, can you test this out and just tell me what you think? Now, that is a very open-ended question, and it doesn't necessarily lead to specific direct feedback, right? You're going to get answers to that is going to be very scattered. And because you're asking something so open-ended, and this is talking more to the responsibility of designers, right? But because you're asking that open-ended question, that's going to lead to you getting more opinions about things. You're going to get people's preferences. You're going to get those kind of random suggestions that may or may not be helpful. And what you're really probably looking for is, hey, I need to evidence, does this design do what I need it to do? So because of that, I think there's a point that designers have to start thinking about, not all feedback is actually equally useful. And I have to think about where I am at that stage of development. So depending on where I am in that DMAIC framework might change the way I want to request feedback. What's the playtime in it? And these are questions we might be able to ask, right? What's the statistical accuracy? Is it accurate? Do you have a good narrative to this game? Does it have too much time where you don't feel like you're engaged with the game? Is there too much chart usage? Not enough? Like, where is that? And do you have enough opportunities to make decisions? When you start asking more specific questions, you can actually get to more direct feedback. So I think it's really important that when designers are seeking playtesters, they really need to be in a position where they start to think about, what am I testing? And that will help them get to more specific questions and get that more direct feedback. Because then they'll know, is this thing working as expected? So that's the responsibility of the designer. If they're going to engage playtesters, they have to think first about, what is the purpose of this game? Am I designing a full play game? Is this an express game? Do I expect this game to have a lot of narrative, or is it very tactical? Is this game going to be project friendly? Do I expect it to use a lot of statistics or generate a lot of statistics? Do I want it to be based on fictional players, or should there be historical players? Or is it some combination of all these things? And so as you're sitting down as a designer, you have to think now, like, what should the experience feel like on the table when the game works as intended? And hopefully the designer has an idea, has thought about what they expect the experience to be, and they can direct their feedback questions to ensure that that experience is what the tester is experiencing. Now, early on in this define or design phase, when you are engaging playtesters, and again, I think when a designer is into this like define or design stage, the main playtester is them. It's really a solo effort at this point in time. Maybe you're starting to engage a couple of close people who are going to be very useful to you, and maybe you've used them before for playtesting. But that early playtesting really has to make sure that, am I actually designing what I intended to design, right? At this point, I'm not really trying to think like, does this game going to generate the right statistics, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. It's more about like, I, for instance, want to create a baseball game. Does this feel like baseball? I wanted to create a, express game. Does this actually feel like an express game? That's really where you want to be in terms of like thinking about like that early define phase or design phase. So if I have like, for instance, a quick play game that feels very heavy, that's probably a miss, or maybe I have a narrative game that has too much mechanical feel to it. That would be a miss. Or do I have a sports game that doesn't really feel like the sport? I can generate numbers for it, but it doesn't actually feel like the sport. Those are opportunities to maybe get back to the drawing board and think about what it looks like. So, in that first phase, there's a really important question, and the feedback that you're getting from playtesters really has to be focused on this idea of, is this the game I thought I was making? And you want to direct any of the questions that you're asking as a designer to those playtesters to get some specific elements and make sure that you're focusing on the actual elements of what the game was intended to deliver. And then as playtesters, if we are engaged very early on in the process, part of the responsibility for us is also to make sure we understand, like, what feedback are you looking for? So if they ask you that open-ended question of like, hey, play this and tell me what you think. Like, okay, well, what exactly are you looking to do? If you're in that early phase and they're saying, hey, I'm just starting to toy around with this. The designer's like, this is just something I've started to create, just spent a little bit of time on. Can you tell me what you think? yeah, sure. What are you trying to design? Because I want to make sure I'm giving you the right feedback. I don't want to start putting my opinion into it. I don't want to start putting my preferences into it at this point in time. Unless that's a specific question that's coming from the designer of like, what would you add to this? What would you do to help deliver this experience? Then I'm open to giving more of the opinion. But at first, I just want to make sure that I'm giving them the feedback that they're looking for. Now, let's say they make it through that define design phase. Now they're going to shift into the measure phase. What's actually happening when I play this game? So now the shift happens where I move from what was my initial impression, right? First impressions. That's really what we're doing for in that design phase. Now we're moving into like actually creating some evidence. Let's think about the types of things that we can track. How long does it actually take to play this game? How many decisions do I have to make during the course of maybe a turn or a play or a quarter, whatever it might be that you want to measure against? Where are we in the scoring ranges? Is it hitting what we would expect from a scoring standpoint? What's the frequency of certain events taking place? Am I getting a lot of blowouts? Does there seem to be too many comebacks? What does it look like when people are getting injuries? How many times am I having to go to the charts? Or how many times do I find that I have to go back and check the rules as I play this? Measurement gets into that place where you move from this idea of, hey, this feels off or this feels right, to being more specific about, here's what actually happened when I played this. And we can do it in a lot of different ways, right? Like we can look at like, hey, I'm expecting this to deliver, maybe it's a historical replay, right? And it's a basketball game. I'm expecting teams to average about 100 points a game. Okay. I can actually track that for you. I can play a few games and see what my average score is. And I can give you an idea about like where we are. Where am I maybe from like a rating standpoint? Do I feel like my matches or the games are actually, would I give it a big thumbs up? Would I be like, wasn't that fun? Whatever it might be, right? Do I feel like I have like a good spread between the results? Like, can I identify good players from bad players, from average players? So these are all things that are now moving into this idea of like, I can actually start to measure. And a lot of times this is when game designers feel like, I think I have a good product right now. Now I just need to do a lot more testing of it. This is places where if you can design like an AI engine to replicate some of your results, it can be really useful here because it can do a lot of testing in a short amount of time. There are a number of designers who are also really good at writing simple computer programs, and they can at least say, okay, now I know what the math is behind this. Now let me run it like 1,000 times and make sure that I'm getting the results that I need. And then for other designers who maybe don't have those skill sets, this is where they need to just get a lot of people playing the game and get a lot of games played so that they have data to use to actually do some of the measurements here. So now you're doing not as much like feedback on, hey, this worked, this didn't work, but as people play it, they might also have some impact on the design again. But you're hoping right now that your design is mostly solid, and now it's just a matter of seeing, can I just get a lot of results in? Can I get this thing measured here, right? So we're not really removing the idea of, hey, what does this feel like? Does it feel like I have a good game? I still want my game testers, my play testers to be able to provide those instincts, right? Does this still feel like a good game? Like that question probably still exists. But right now what I'm trying to do is say, hey, these are the things that I'm trying to measure. So let's really focus on just getting in a lot of results, and then that will tell us what we need to do some fine tuning. And that's going to now move this into the next phase, which is the analyze phase. Why is what's happening? This is where a designer really needs to kind of resist the urge to immediately fix every problem that they see. Let it play out for a little bit. Let your results come in, right? Let that measurement phase do what it's supposed to do and get to a point where you say, and you should have an idea about like how many measurements do I want to get before I start to analyze? Like many of us, right? And when you start playing a game, you shouldn't react to like the first 2 or 3 games that you play and be like, I don't think this game is accurate, right? Like this guy hit 4 home runs in 3 games. Like, okay, well, maybe play like 20 or 30 or 50 games and see if that still holds up. Or does, the law of averages start to play out the right way? And you're like, he hit 4 in the first 3 games. And then after 50, he had like 6. He got to where I would expect him to be. Like sometimes that's what happens, right? Well, designers have to do the same thing too. Now, as they get in enough measures, now their job is to start asking some of the questions. Does this game take too long to play? Well, maybe that's because I made it where there's too many turns, or they're having to roll the dice too many times. Or maybe there's too much chart checking that goes on. Or there's too much bookkeeping that they have to do throughout the game, right? Your job now as a designer and to get the feedback from the playtesters is to start figuring out, like, why was it too long? Why do you think our statistics are off, right? You're looking for that specific feedback to address where the measurements don't match the expectation. So playtesters can be really useful at this point because they may help you identify some of the real pain points. And these might become like the things that as people start playing it post-launch, they're going to say, yeah, this doesn't work for me. Like, this is what I don't like about this game. But those pain points doesn't always mean that they've found the right reason what's causing it. So this is where it's really important in design, in process design, to, as you're performing your analysis, don't just focus on the symptoms. Try to identify the root causes for it. Maybe you're making too many dice rolls, and it's not about the fact that, I should just reduce the number of times I'm doing dice rolls. No, actually what you should do is reduce the number of times that you have to check something. You're asking for too many checks on something, and that's why you're leading into too many dice rolls. Simplify the number of checks that you have to perform, and you can reduce the number of dice rolls. Have a result get to those core results quicker. Maybe 80% of the time I can resolve a play with that single die roll and leave the 20% of my results to having additional die rolls to really dial into some specifics. And that will lead to fewer dice rolls. These are the types of things that the designers will need to do, and they can get really good, focused feedback again from their playtesters. So this is a place where the designers and, again, in turn, the playtesters can start to think about, like, hey, well, when did that issue occur? When did you feel like you were rolling the dice too many times? When you say we rolled it too many times, how often were you rolling too many times? Is this more anecdotal than it is like actually like a real measurement that we have? And then what were some of the conditions that led to that? This is going to help you get to that. Again, we're looking for the root causes. What is really causing the problem? It may not be what you see at the surface. It might be something else that drives that issue. And you want to get into that root cause to figure out, if I fix that, that will fix those other symptoms that we're starting to see. So that's where you are when you're in that analyze phase. You're really trying to focus in on this idea of, what did the measurements tell me? What did I see as outliers to the experience that I'm trying to create? And what is the root cause that is driving those issues? So now we move into that fourth phase, improve. So now we're going after some specific things. We've already designed the game. We've already measured the results. We've already analyzed some of the places where things aren't happening as expected, and we think we've identified the root causes. Well, the reason we call this the improve phase is now we're trying to test the fix. I'm going to hone in on those root causes, and I'm going to try to figure out, this is how I fix it. I need more testing again. This is really where I can really get into really specific feedback from playtesters. And I think in general, this is when most designers are at a place where they are doing exactly what they need to do. They know exactly what they're trying to test, and they can get to a playtester and say, here's the thing I'm trying to work. There was a really key moment in the design, for instance, of Highlight Maker Hoops, the primetime game. And one of the things that led to a little bit of a delay in the release of that game, there was a couple of things at play, but I remember one of them, and talking to some of the playtesters and talking with like Keith Avalone, they weren't comfortable with the number of fouls that the game was generating. And there was a disagreement on terms of like, hey, well, the measurements say this, but then the playtesters are also saying, yeah, but it feels like this. And so they had to keep working on what does the fix look like for that. And I'm sure every game designer, as they're going through, has that one pivotal point where there's something that just isn't working as expected. And what they're trying to do then is figure out, how do we fix this piece? So that when I get to the improve, that playtesting really does get very focused, very specific, right? I'm moving away from those open-ended questions of like, hey, do you like this game? To a more specific question of like, does this change solve the problem that we had? Maybe I'm revising things like fatigue rules, right? Maybe I have like some brawl mechanics in like a game that I need to adjust. Maybe it just means that I have to adjust like the cards a little bit to change the scoring. All these little changes that we'll make is to dial it in a little bit more. And you're trying to address some of the problems that came up through measurement, and then the fixes that you thought about during the analyze phase. Every fix that you're working on here could actually create new problems, right? So one of the things that designers need to do is ask playtesters to watch for those unintended consequences. I may fix A, but now I've created a new problem for B. Watch for that to make sure that we don't go down the wrong path, because we don't want to get into this swirl where everything we fix causes another problem somewhere else. We want to try to address what was that root cause that we identified and get it to a place where that works and everything else stays the way we had. So your key takeaway during this improve phase is we're really trying to test the fixes at this point. Right before this game gets launched, we felt really comfortable with the design, right? We feel really good with the measurements that we're getting with it. There were a couple of places potentially where we were looking to get this game dialed in a little bit better. And that's what we're trying to test in this improve phase, not the entire game. At this point, we're not looking for someone to be like, yeah, except it doesn't really feel like baseball. Like, okay, well, that was something we were trying to cover a couple of phases ago, right? Like, now you might get that lone opinion, or somebody might say, I would do this. Like, well, that was the design phase, right? That's when you're looking to get a lot of that information in. So I think there's times where designers get a little sidetracked by the feedback that they're getting, and maybe they're not targeting the feedback enough at this point. Because at this point, if you're in the improve phase and you're a designer, you should feel really good with the game you've designed. You should feel mostly good with the measurements you're getting from it, and say, yeah, there's just a couple of things that I'm trying to fine tune. So try to make sure that the feedback you get at this point is on the places you're trying to fine tune. And don't get sidetracked by, oh, yeah, that's another idea. I could bring this in. Doesn't mean that those are bad ideas, right? But really try to make sure you don't we call this like scope creep a lot too, right? Like some people want to like make your thing into something different. And you have to say to yourself, like, is that going against my original design? Now, there might be times where throughout this process, you get some of that feedback and you might say, all right, that's actually good. I actually think I need to figure out how to make that work. And at that point, you almost want to kind of pause, go back, and rework this thing from the design phase again, because every change you make now could impact everything else. And you want to make sure that it's happening in the right way, right? So that's why when you're at that fine tuning phase, like make sure you stay focused on fine tuning. And if you give specific directions to your playtesters, hopefully what they give you back is that specific feedback that you need. And again, when we get to that control phase, this is making sure that improvement sticks, right? I always think that, to me, control means I probably have been ready to launch this thing. Now, I may decide to wait on launching it, and I may want to just have do beta testing at this point, right? And this is where, when people talk about things like beta testing, a lot of it is happening at this point in time, right? Where you feel like this is a finished product. Now we just want to get to a place where people can start using it. And for some designers, they're okay with doing this post-launch, right? They can do that kind of beta testing after launching a product and say, I know that this thing is pretty much there. So you might see some designers will skip this as a pre-launch and move it to a post-launch. And I think both are acceptable. A lot of that might come down to where they are in terms of a design. Without even asking Keith Avalone, here's what I would tell you. When he launches a game in the holiday sale, my opinion of it is he has finished the improve phase and is ready to do the control phase. And because he's not ready to necessarily say, I'm ready to put this into print, he's going to perform his beta testing by giving people a chance to play with the PDF version of the game. And that will tell him if there's any other small adjustments he wants to make here at this point in time. And then he's ready, once he sees enough playtesters doing some of that beta testing, he's now ready to put this out as a printed product. My opinion, not hearing from him specifically, but as someone who watches processes and designs processes, that's what I am seeing from Play Games, is their approach to that. And lots of other designers have similar approaches there. Maybe they offer a couple of free teams, I think Clay Dresslock is really good about this also, right? He'll put it out. Hey, here's the game. Here's a couple of teams. Go ahead and play it. Not only does that give people a chance to see if they even like playing this game, but it gives him an opportunity to get more feedback from folks too. So here's what you're at now. When you get to this control phase, has now this revised game that we've made, right? We've tested the fixes. We've implemented the fixes. Now we have a revised game. Can I play this consistently? Can someone else other than the designer pick this up with the rules, with the components, and can they actually play this game? Right? Do the rules have clarity? Do they seem stable? Are they repeatable? Right? Simple and repeatable is a big phrase in terms of process design, and a lot of our game designers are trying to deliver just that. And this is a great place when you get to this control phase and get a lot of testers engaged. Now I want to find out where those edge cases are, right? These games are going to generate some, outlier results at times, and I need to see what those look like because they may not always happen in my controlled playtesting up until this point. This is a great place where I may have been playtesting, or my other playtesters may have been using a small sample of teams. We may have built the game to work for a certain number of teams. Now, will it hold up across different teams, different seasons? If it's an individual sport, maybe wrestling, does it hold up against different wrestlers? If it's a racing game, can this hold up against a lot more tracks, right? Different leagues, different project types. You're going to want to see all of those different things start to happen during this control phase. And this is where the tinkering by the designer should really come to almost slowing down to pretty much a crawl. And what they want to do is instead see a lot more confidence in the design of the game, right? Now they're just looking for those specific questions. And your playtesters should say, and they should ask themselves, can this game keep working after it leaves my table? If it moves to somebody else's table, somebody else picks this game up, is this game going to work? So those are the 5 phases of design, or of process design. If you're a playtester, and you listened in on this, think about what your core responsibilities are. And we've got 5 of them, right? First is play the game as written. Your job is not to start kind of correcting some unclear rules, right? Or fill in missing procedures. If you run into a gray space, you need to go to the designer and say, what's the intent here? How should I be playing this rule? Or I don't know what I do at this point in the game, right? That helps them get feedback on what they should do. And they may come back and say, that part I intentionally left, like where you can fill in. Okay, great. Now I know I'm into that place where I can start doing a little bit of home brewing. But hopefully there's not a lot of that, right? Because that can start to lead to more ambiguous results. Second responsibility of the playtester is report what happened before you suggest the fixes. We call this making the problem statement. Put your problem statement out there. And then if you have it, you can offer a potential solution. But make sure that the designer knows this is what my problem was. This is when it happened. This is what I was doing. Here's what I would think about doing as a potential solution. The designer needs to hear the problem more than the solution. They may have some ideas on how to fix it. Getting your feedback and some potential solutions is great, but they need to know what the problem is before they hear the solution. Third task for your play testers: test the intended change. This is especially important right during that improve phase. Focus your feedback on that specific design that is being tested. The designer hopefully has provided you with a specific question. We're testing this component. Let me know what you think about this. Your job is to then test that over and over and over again. I think a lot of sometimes there's playtesters who just want to say, I'm just going to keep playing games with this. And that's great. But if we're at the point where I need to test a specific part of the engine, you have to kind of move away from delivering your own results for maybe like a project or something and get to a place where you're just offering up specific feedback on that one element. That's your job. Fourth thing that we need from the play testers: separate your personal taste from the design function. Your job primarily is to let the designer know when something is broken, not when it's not how you would like to see it played. The designer's the one who will design the game. Your job is just to tell them whether it does what it was intending to do. And the final piece of the puzzle here is protect the intended experience. If they're designing a baseball game, let the designer know whether or not this game still feels like baseball. Does it deliver a story like you would expect it to? Or does it at least project that it will promise to deliver that? Now, let's flip the table a little bit and say what the designers, here's what we need from you. If we're play testers, we have a couple of things we need from you as well. First, when you ask playtesters to get engaged, make sure that they have a clear goal for their session. What are you looking for from them? That probably depends on where you are in that DMAIC structure. Second, make sure that you're always giving them the most current version of the rules, the charts, the cards, or your components. You don't want them testing version 3 if you're already on version 5. This is where it can get really frustrating on both sides, right? Like I may have gone and printed out everything that the designer sent me. And then 2 days later, he's like, I got a new version. It's like, oh, okay. And if I'm playtesting, depending on where I am, that might be something that I have to just kind of live with and say, okay, I know that they're really early in the design phase here. There's going to be a lot of changes. They're going to be constantly coming up with new things. Hopefully later on, I can get to a place where I'm not having to make a ton of changes. And maybe they're like, hey, just cross out this result and put this in instead. Okay, that I can do, right? But just understand as a playtester, the designer's not done till the designer says he's done. And changes are going to be happening throughout. So the designer, your job is just to make sure that you give us the most recent thing. Your third responsibility as a designer: ask specific questions instead of only asking about general impressions. If you're asking questions like, hey, do you like the game? Early on, that might be okay, but you want to be more specific. Get to the points of like, what are you looking to see that they like? Talk about what the intended experience is. Fourth thing that designers need to do is make it easy for your playtesters to report what happened. This shouldn't be something that's difficult, right? Do you have a way for them to send you box scores that you can go through? Do you have somewhere to capture results if you're actually in the measurement phase? Do you have like a nice feedback form that you can get? And maybe that has those specific questions that you're looking for, right? Those are the things that you need to do, is make it easy for your playtesters to give you the information back. Fifth thing that you need to do as a designer is create permission, right? Basically make sure that people know, like, it's okay to give me honest feedback, right? You're not going to be attacking me. You're attacking, if anything, the product itself. Yes, it's my design, but it needs to be picked apart a little bit. I know what I want to do. I need to know if I'm actually delivering as expected or as intended. So give me that honest feedback. And if I make it difficult for people to give me honest feedback and all I'm looking for is, man, I just want you to tell me it's good, like, then that's all you're going to get, and you're not going to get an actual decent product. If the only thing you're looking for, in fact, I know there's some designers who are really good about that, where you're like, oh man, this was really fun. Okay, well, why was it fun? I need the specifics. That's great that you enjoyed it. Why did you enjoy it? And if you're like, I know they enjoyed it, but I watched them play that game and I saw that there were some pain points, like, get really specific about, hey, yeah, but did this part work for you? Like, understand like what you can do there. And that kind of leads into what this is like your final responsibility is let the playtesters know that what we're trying to do is create a partnership here. You as a playtester are a partner of mine in my design. You are not here to give me like a performance review. You're not telling me whether I'm a good designer or a bad designer. You're helping me design a better game. And I think by framing it up as a partnership, you're going to really get to a place where everybody feels good about the product. And hopefully when you're ready to go to launch, you've got an army of playtesters who are saying, I'm really excited about this game. This is going to be fun. All right, let's come back and wrap up today's episode. So yeah, today we talked a little bit about the role of playtesting. Let's face it, playtesting protects a game. And if you have designers who kind of shortcut the playtesting or shortcut that DMAIC process and go quickly from design to control, you're probably looking at an inferior product. Some people can do this quicker than others, but I think because you want to engage playtesting is what's going to, when I know that there's a designer out there who's doing a lot of playtesting, I know in the end I'm going to get a better product. It still may not be a product that I want to play because the intent of the designer may not match my intent. And that's okay. It's going to match someone's intent. And that's why I really think it's kind of like foundational that if a designer is designing a game, they have to design one first and foremost that they enjoy playing. Because if they don't enjoy it, there won't be a lot of other people that do. Playtesting isn't going to be just one phase. It has different jobs at different phases. You heard a little bit today about how each one of those 5 phases of the product or process design leads to different responsibilities for playtesters. We have to do this in terms of, like, if we look at that DMAIC process, right? First, we have to define the product. We have to define the intent of what we're trying to create. Then we have to measure. We have to measure the results. We then try to find where are those problems, what is driving them, what causes this to be a problem in the game, and then fix those design flaws, and then make sure that everything works, again, back to the original intent. And that's that control phase, is to make sure it's working as expected. Your best playtesters are going to do more than just find mistakes. They're going to give really solid feedback on what the experiences. They're going to provide really good measurement against the known objectives. And in some cases, they may offer some, some solutions, but they're going to do a really good job of defining what the problem was. That's really what designers probably look for, or even if they're not looking for it actively, should be looking for as they go through the process of designing a game. To me, if I was a designer, and even when I'm a playtester, the things that I'm first and foremost trying to do is say, does this feel like the sport? Does this have the right flow so that I feel like sport is happening on my tabletop? Am I getting the right narrative, the right story? And is there value in replaying this game? Do I want to bring it back out to my table again? So if you're a designer, make sure you're asking the right questions. And if you're asking open-ended questions and you think about the way you're asking questions and they're open-ended, work on creating some better questions. So this way, when you put your prototype in front of playtesters, you can get the specific feedback that you're looking for. Because remember, and this is my kind of final thought on this, playtesting isn't just about fixing a game, right? It's about helping the game become what it was meant to be. All right, next week, episode 253. I had postponed my interview with ST Patrick. We're going to get him on for next week's episode. Just had some scheduling conflicts, so ST will be joining me for an interview this week. You'll hear that next weekend. But until then, if you want to support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/Tabletop SportCast. $1 a week goes a long way to helping to offset costs for the podcast. I am probably going to run a contest on there in the next week or two to kind of virtually celebrate Digital to Dice. And so if you're interested, head on over there and you can get into a new... I'm going to be basically running a lottery for a new product. So you have to head on over to Patreon to see what that product is and to see if it's something you might be interested in. If you're already a member, you'll have an opportunity. And if you want to join as a new member, it'll give you a chance to be part of that as well. If you want to keep up with the latest from my tabletop, head on over to facebook.com/Tabletop SportCast. I try to post a few times during the week and keep you up to date on everything that's happening with my projects. And lastly, if you have any feedback or want to talk about your projects, send me an email, tabletopsportcast@gmail.com. Love to hear from members of the community and just keep that dialogue open. All right, that's a wrap on today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. And until next week, thanks for listening.